Okay, so this is my video of my supercharged Blazer, what I did to it. Things that I would change with this supercharger is one, there's the air intake tube. That thing came apart on me so many times that I got tired of it. So I went and got just PVC pipe from Home Depot, and I glued it together and made my own custom intake pipe, and I wrapped it in heat rejection covering. You can buy that from AutoZone. So the intake pipe the supercharger comes with is like this, and except for it doesn't have the heat shield wrap on it. It's just a black PVC pipe with these connectors, and these came apart on me all the time on rough roads, and so I got tired of that. And there's another change I made. I wrapped the intake in the heat rejection cover because there's so much heat coming off from the exhaust in the motor that the intake charge gets hotter than I would like it to be going into the supercharger. It's not a problem if you are just daily driving it, just driving around town. But for the way I use this Blazer with towing, that's a big problem. And so my intake, and then another change I made in regards to the intake. When I rebuilt the intake with the sewer black PVC pipe from the Home Depot, I moved the air temperature sensor from before the supercharger all the way up to the intake hat, which is right here. And it isn't a boost, but there's a grommet that fits really tight into this aluminum top right here, and that doesn't leak at all. I also wrapped this all in heat rejection tape too, and then if you don't want to use the mass airflow sensor, you can do a couple things different. You can't than me. You can take these tubes that I have coming off right here, and you don't have to hook a pipe from the hat back into the intake, and you can just use a little vent for your crankcase that just sits over there that comes with the kit, but I didn't use that. I'm using a mass airflow sensor, and this vehicle still remains 50 state emission compliant, so all the gases from the crankcase still route back into the intake, which allows the mass airflow sensor to still meter correctly. If you don't do that, then your metering is off. Throw lean codes. So the other thing that I would change, the thing that is a little bit confusing is there's a belt right here, and you have to have the tension. You can't have the belt tight. The belt has to be loose with about 6/10 of an inch of slop in it. Otherwise, going down the road with the heat, the belt will tighten up and will mess up the bearings in the supercharger. And the first time I installed this, without any other changes I've made to this setup, my intake air on a 32-degree day was approaching 150 degrees, and I'm just putting up the mountain. And so I since changed that. So another thing that I would change from the kit, so the owner of Wynjammer superchargers, he kind of recommends, but doesn't say you need to have ceramic coated headers. You really don't. You can get by with just your regular manifolds as long as you're just daily driving it. But if you're going to go racing or you're going to tow like I do, you really need to put ceramic coated manifolds. So because I tow, which is a lot harder on metal than just daily driving or racing, I ceramic coated my manifolds, and you can't see those, but they're ceramic coated. I put a few thousand miles on them. They're ceramic coated manifolds already, and the heat rejection by ceramic coating the manifold is huge. It's the difference between being able to sustain full load and your temperatures stay steady on a 3-row radiator versus having your heat climb all the way up to 240 degrees Fahrenheit, which is quite hot for a supercharged motor. That's kind of really putting a lot of stress on the motor, 240 degrees Fahrenheit, even though overheating is technically not till 260. So that's another thing. I put a bigger radiator in. I have a 3-row radiator in my Blazer, which allows me to just work it as hard as I want to, just like factory. The factory radiator will get you by as a daily driver, but your temperatures will likely want to climb a little bit. And if you're in a hot climate, say Arizona, Southern California, Nevada, or even maybe anywhere in the South where it gets hot during certain times during the summer months, you'll want a bigger radiator. And then also to help with heat, I have a fan up behind the driver's side light to help pull in cool air, to help lower my intake air temperatures even more. This is particularly important when I'm towing or just sitting in city traffic, to help keep intake air temperatures under control, particularly if I'm running the air conditioning, because the air conditioning really pumps in a lot of heat under the hood of the motor. Another change I would make is if you're going to work your motor really hard, I would exhaust wrap your exhaust around the transmission. It can get cherry red now instead of just, your exhaust can run as high as 1,700 degrees Fahrenheit now. It's hot enough that you're right on the very edge of being able to melt down your catalytic converter under a high load situation, even with the motor running perfectly fine. So, also, something I'm still working on, and things I would still like to change, is get a better air box for the intake air, because really blocking out the hot air that's coming in through the radiator and blowing on it, really the intake air will pull a lot of that hot air in, and hot air means less horsepower. I like horsepower, and so does everyone else. So a proper air box will keep your intake air a lot cooler if you can block out that air that's blowing into the corner. Another change I've made is, I have a transmission cooler on it now, so I have an external transmission cooler. I also have an external oil cooler. So the way the factory radiator works is it actually helps as a water heater, or oil heater, to help keep the oil at about 195 degrees Fahrenheit to help with the lubricity of that. Well, with the supercharger and I'm towing, I don't have that problem, or just putting around the mountains. My oil gets plenty hot. I don't need oil to heat my oil in the radiator. I'm trying to cool down, so I just send it into an external oil cooler that's thermally regulated to 185 degrees Fahrenheit. And I ran with this motor with 195 degrees Fahrenheit thermostat in it, and you probably should do as Al or Wynjammer says to do, put a 180 degree thermostat in the motor. It'll help to maintain the temperature a lot better than, say, a 195, because the 180 not only does it lower the overall temperature of the motor, but it also helps lower the intake air temperature, because that can get rather hot, and so you're adding less heat into the intake air. And more air, cooler air is denser air, which is more power that is free. Now with all that, this motor I have been able to run this motor in a triple degree heat day, climbing hills, and the heat on the motor does stay stable. It stays about 210 degrees now Fahrenheit, full throttle, just working it all the way to the max. So this is a stable setup. Things I would still like to change. It would be nice if I had an intercooler right here on the intake, so I could really control the intake air temperatures a lot better, because the intake air gets hotter than I'm really comfortable with, and the motor it's a fairly conservative tune to help prevent knock in all situations. So my power is not as high as it could be, as I would just tune this motor for racing. Truck tune is different than a car tune, and it's different than a racing tune. The other thing is, Al recommends you gap your spark plugs to 35 thousandths. I actually have my spark plugs gapped to 25 thousandths, and I'm running the Polestar plugs. That's just my personal preference, but that's what I run, and it runs really good. And I have factory timing in this motor, even with the supercharger, which could be good, could be not that good, but it's factory timing with all the factory temperature adjustments that are inside in the tune. So that is what I've tested. I've logged a lot of hours, particularly when I'm towing, that this particular setup works with very little knock. And it's a daily driver. I prefer my vehicles to not require a lot of work, and so this particular setup doesn't require a lot of work. Although tonight I did replace my alternator because the bearings were going out, but it was the factory original alternator, and it's a 2001 Chevrolet Blazer ZR2, and I think I got my life. I think I worked the alternator, got everything I could out of it. And because I'm going to be going on a long trip here soon, it's better to replace the alternator with the bad bearings before the bearing seize up and I'm stranded on the side of the road. The other thing, oh, one more thing. I have an Excel coil on this for a bigger spark. And whether that really does much, I don't know. I didn't dyno it. I haven't ever dynoed this Blazer, even though I might dyno it someday. So that's this motor right here. Now, my opinion of it is that I like to drive it because it's quicker, it's got more torque. For the elevation that I'm at, for just cruising around town, it's got the grunt, where it's a little bit more grunty than, say, most of the other vehicles on the street, because the way it accelerates is a little bit quicker than average. So you barely go put into the throttle and you're really moving down the road. I really like this when I go merging on the track and on the freeway, and I got a short on-ramp. I can go and accelerate quickly up to whatever the speed is. And some of those freeway on-ramps here are, the freeway speed is 80 miles per hour, and this allows me to really accelerate. Another nice thing about this is if it's windy, I've got something up on the roof rack, and I'm driving into the wind, it just has the grunt, it just plows through the wind. Now there's one issue though. You can never get more horsepower without burning more gas. And so so many people believe that, oh, I can make more horsepower, I can make it more efficient. But the factory already has tuned the cam to approximately the maximum efficiency for the motor and to pass the emission test from the EPA. And so any cam you put in will probably reduce your fuel economy, although you'll make more horsepower, and more torque, you will lose fuel economy. And so that's the one caveat here. I get the same fuel economy driving down the road as I did without it supercharged, and I still make more horsepower, but I have all the power I want when I want it, so I can burn more fuel depending on the conditions. And that's